I would like to just invite all of us to turn our focus inward. And I want you to think about allowing yourself to just put up a nice big barrier, however that looks for you, whether it's putting yourself in a cocoon, swaddling yourself in a blanket, wrapping yourself in something that feels safe and comfortable in this moment. Whatever comes to mind. There you go, Kristie.
My whoopee.
Yeah, wrapping yourself up in your whoopee. Like, where can we find a little bit of comfort inside? One of the things that we're going to maybe explore a little bit today is the 24th key, which has a shadow of addiction and a Siddhi of silence. And while this podcast, this experience, this coffee chat might be a little boring if it was completely silent, we're going to allow for some space for that today. And so that means going ahead and blocking out the world if we need to in moments, and allowing ourselves just to be present within ourselves where we feel safe, and know that anything that feels out of alignment, anything that feels maybe a little too vulnerable before we're ready, that we can just hold that safely within us and breathe into it. You're okay. You are safe here. However you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing right now, you're safe inside here with me. It's okay. I will shield you. I will guard you. I will keep you protected. Breathing into that and allowing your lungs to expand, almost imagining them like wings around your heart, just holding that delicate space. I'm here with you. You are safe. You are okay. Letting our lungs expand, knowing that our hearts are beating, looking around at each other's faces, and saying, we know that this is a safe space. This is a safe space for all of us to be who we are, and to be exploring and playing with new concepts and new ideas. Concepts and ideas that take us out of the addictions of our old stories, our old feelings, our patterns, and our ways of being, and allow us to play with and explore new ways of being, like this cycle of death and rebirth. Just like we experience it in nature, we have death and rebirth every season. And sometimes that requires us to go within, to let there be silence. Like just winter is a prime example of that, allowing the die off of one year so that the spring can emerge and we can cultivate and flower something new. And it comes from that compost. All of the shit that we are allowing to die off. And we need to do that in a safe and protected space. When you think about planting a seed in the soil, it goes into the darkness. It's held by the earth so that it can be nurtured to grow and flower. And that's what I want to play with today, if that's okay with all of you. And just knowing that we're safe to just be within ourselves today, if that's what we need. Breathing together, playing together in our safe space. And I just want to say that I am so incredibly grateful for each one of you. Erin was just here with me making another transition in my life. And so good.
I'm on mute because it's like, can you hear my family in the real life, hashtag real life of like stomping and all the noise and all the things. Okay. So that's why I said most of the time I put on mute.
It's who we are, girl. It's who we are.
Or the dog snoring in the background. Go ahead, Tanya.
No, you
were saying, yeah, like, if we're talking about addictions are for me, and this is what I was telling Brenda this morning, I was like, addictions for me is like, it's fine. And this is what I had to tell Tanya. I'm like, I've lived my life with like, it's fine. I'll deal with it. I'll make do. I'll suck it up, like all of the things, right? And so growth for me is, it's not fine. I don't want to do this. It's a wanting versus having to, brought up, the last couple of days with Tanya, it brought up like, and this is what I told her. I'm like, I can do anything. I've done anything, dealt with anything in terms of like, I don't want to say mediocrity. I don't know what word I'm really like, but like having to do like, but is it what I want to do anymore? And breaking that addiction of, I don't want to. And then Erin feeling disappointed. And also disappointment was my form of, I don't want to call it punishment, but discipline growing up. So getting spanked, I didn't really get spanked. It was either just raise your voice at me or I'm very disappointed in you. And that was enough to send me, spinning, and also just like, I'll do whatever, whatever I gotta do. So the addiction, if you want to call it that, of like, it's only a couple of more days, or it's only this, or I can just make do with it. And breaking that cycle. I don't know what word comes to mind, right? Breaking that cycle of like, but I don't want to anymore. And letting that be okay for Erin, because the mind chatter's like, but you can, and it's fine. And you're making a big deal out of things, and it's not that bad. And, all of the things that it loves to tell you. And also, how does that affect other people, right? Because how is that might upset, because I grew up like believing, I think we all do, that I make people feel a certain way. So even though I know that logically and rationally in my body, it's like, but Tanya's going to be disappointed. Or I didn't feel that when I was like, told you when I was like, I want to go home. I didn't feel that. I knew you would be okay with it, but it was maybe other people, right? And so it was like that feeling of like, I'm going to upset someone. And the addiction is, for me, it's like, you keep the peace.
Make sure other people are happy over your happiness.
Yep. Total people pleasing. And this is, Erin and I, we've talked a lot about, and all of us, I think I've shared this concept that when we are in the process of starting to change, to heal, to overcome our addictions, which could also be called our patterns, our conditioning, we start way out here. We're seeing it in our community, we're seeing it in our leaders, we're seeing it in the news, and then we bring that lens a little bit closer, and it's our immediate family. It's the closest relationships to us, usually our spouses, our partners, our children, if we have them. And then we have to bring it completely within us before we are ready to start going out and practicing being this new person. The gift that comes from in the gene keys, the gift that comes from addiction is invention. And it's not like inventing things, but inventing a new persona. And it's this thing that just arises within us. So as we're starting to move back outwards, we're taking this new persona, this new set of beliefs, these new patterns out, and we're sort of having to test them. And first we test them with our closest people, and then we test them within our social groups, and then, right, and that's part of that process of building up, letting certain things die, and then building up the new. So the fact that you knew that I would be okay, but like I'm now in a circle with other people, how are they going to perceive this? And noticing how that came up.
And also, I think too, for me, what I've noticed, Kristie was asking a question to me the other day, like we were talking about body, like I have been open and sharing, like sometimes my emotions will show up in my body, like through my underarms or rashes or things of that sort. And what I told her is now sometimes it's to a point where it shows up in my body first, and I'm not quite yet aware of what I'm feeling. And then there's kind of a lag or a couple of days, right? That then I'm like, oh, this is what it is. And so being very in tune with my body, which before it probably wasn't that way at all. And noticing I felt it in my body, but I was trying to make sense. And this is also, it's like, I think it's important that people, like, we all have our own way of knowing, right? I know Tanya's been very verbal about, like, she hears like yes or no's, or I don't hear those things. I just have a sense, like, I don't even know if it's, I mean, I call it a visceral, but it was just like, no, right? And talk about addiction. I have overrode that so many times in my past of, like, now looking back, like there were so many times I felt no, and I just kept forcing and pushing through because that was my conditioning of that's what you do. And commitment, you know, if we talk about addictions, I think for me, committing is, I'm going to say, and then let my words come as they do, but like, if I committed, I'm not allowed to change my mind. Commitment has been to me is like, if you say yes all the way through. So breaking that pattern of, well, I know I said yes, but now I changed my mind, and it's also okay to change my mind. And that may not sit well with other people. And so going back to at all costs, too bad, you said yes, you got to deal with it.
I have a question is running around in my head, because I feel like traditionally people only associate the word addiction with like drugs or alcohol. Right? And I think the question that's like looming, like swirling, is like, are all addictive patterns, addictive responses, addictive behaviors bad? Right? Like, I always have attributed addiction to semantically convey a negative message. But I'm like questioning this thought of like, could you make, is there a positive side of addiction? Like, could you be addicted to meditation? Could you be addicted to healthy eating?
I don't personally, Erin doesn't look at addiction as a bad thing. I look at it as a way that we have used something or done something as a way, as either self-preservation or like when someone, I mean, there's several people in my family that are alcoholics, have been recovering and still are alcoholics. And it's not a bad thing. I don't view it as a bad thing. I view it as a way that they have used that to not feel or to protect themselves from things that it's too much. And so I don't look at like I said, me personally, I don't look at it as an addiction as a bad thing. And I think that society has kind of deemed it, right? Like, if you have an addiction, there's something wrong with you. It's like, no, that's actually, and I think Gabor Mate talks about this. It's like, that is what we have done as a
coping mechanism.
I was going to say coping stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I don't see addiction as a bad thing either. I see it as a potential to bring awareness to an imbalance. right? Addiction, really, we could maybe even replace that word with an imbalance, an adaptation that is being utilized for an imbalance. Like when yes, we think about drugs and alcohol, but we don't think about watching TV or having sex or meditating or people pleasing, like taking care of other people as an addiction. But it certainly is, right? And it's usually an imbalance where we're trying to compensate or cope with something that is out of balance for us.
Yeah, I even think about meditation. I mean, now that you say that, Kristie, like someone that were to spend a lot of time meditating, way more than maybe that, like, here we go back to like, here, we're trying to, kind of always maybe being in the, I won't say being in the middle, but you know what I mean? Like too much of anything.
Well, I'm also thinking, and you all might have a word for this, but like addictive thinking, right? Tanya, you had even said something about like your mind swirling, and I'm so guilty of that. Like it's just constant. And yeah, I'm like, can even thoughts be addictive?
Yeah, like when you say that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I used to do, because it kept me right here. I didn't have to feel. I just was like in this thought loop over and over, and I could try to logic myself out and rationalize it, but it was a way to just keep me not feeling.
Yeah. It's the thing that has led me into alcohol the most, honestly. To be honest, that's how I grew up, like seeing people drink in every situation possible, whether it was happy or sad or mad or disappointed, right? It was just like the whole gamut of emotion was paired with alcohol. And because I feel like I have a little bit of a hyperactive brain, it was just like always going. That is something that just kind of takes the edge off, right? And it's been a very interesting space when I like intentionally don't have it in my life, like for periods of time, how it's inhibited me from learning a different way, right? Like I know that I have the power to quiet my mind. I know I have like many other ways to comfort myself or to celebrate, right? But it just has become such an easy, convenient response.
And perhaps it's the one that the body goes to first. Like you could find yourself drinking before you've even actually thought about it.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I would go out dancing, and anytime I ended up at the bar with a drink, which I didn't have the drinking thing, but for me it was smoking. It was like those two things were just associated together, but that's what I watched my grandmother do. And addictions can like take all forms. And Brenda, I want to ask you, because I know that we're talking in gene key language right now about like the shadow, the gift, and the Siddhi. I would love if you would share, because I think it's a little different than addictions, what the key or the gate is called in human design. S'il vous plaît.
The gate is called returning, and it's a cycling of thoughts, which could be, I guess it could be an addictive behavior where you never settle on something, but the concept is that you're constantly returning to the thoughts over and over and over again, hoping to refine them down and to make sense of things. And a lot of times that is where we, if we can't stop that process, numbing it in some way is a way to shut it off. And I think I'm not pointing at Kristie, but I kind of feel like that's what she was saying, is that, she's cycling these thoughts in her head, and it's not unproductive at all. That's not the intent of these things. It's trying to make more sense out of a situation that there may not be sense to, right? There may not be a logical end to this because where this gate sits, it's sitting in an individual circuit. So if you're trying to make sense of life, it's only going to make sense to you and your perspective on things. It's not going to be something that you're thinking through. If you're trying to think through like world hunger, let's just throw that out there. This gate is about an internal perspective on that. And it's not necessarily something that's broadcast over the collective or over the community or the world. And so that, I'm just trying to think, the way it's reflected is, a cycling of thoughts to where thoughts become spirals. And when the thoughts become spirals, do we have the ability to say, enough on that for now? Because really what's going to happen is that answer is going to come to you in silence. Silence is in part of the gates as well, right? And then knowing, an internal knowing is really only for you. It's not necessarily a knowing for the world. So is there enough? When you get to a point, what's enough?
Can you help me clarify something? I get all twisted with gates and
Sure.
I'm like, what is, there's so many words, right? When you say this characteristic of like mind spinning, I don't know if these are the right words. We're not talking about like this week, right? We're talking about
it depends on if you have it defined for you. It could be all the time if you have it defined for you. It just happens to be in transit right now.
Got it. And it's 24. Is that what you said?
Yep, it's 24.
That makes sense. Okay. Because I was like, I feel like this defines my entire existence. And I don't understand how it could only happen 1 week, but that makes sense. If it's defined in my chart, then that,
like, everybody has everything.
Yes.
Right. And it's just, if it's defined for you, it's something that's either consciously defined for you or unconsciously defined for you. And whether or not, the conscious versus unconscious is you may not be aware if it's unconscious for you. Those people who have it defined find the transits equally challenging. And for those of us who don't have it defined, it becomes a conscious thing for us for this week, if you will, where things may pop up or things may spin in our heads that we don't normally have happen. And it may be confusing and overwhelming. And it's just to be aware that, we're going through this transit of time, and you might be feeling in the middle of it right now, being very confused because this isn't normal for you. And then in a couple of days when we're out of it, it's like, well, what was that all about? And we're just trying to highlight some of what's going on with the transits.
And sorry, I do want to just comment on one more thing. Something that I want to just be like, I don't know, willing to share is that my experience with the numbing and the buffering and avoidance, I think it's avoidance, if anything, like it's kind of a classic for me. Also, not only like quiets the mind, but it also gets in the way of me recognizing those subtle shifts. So when I can endure and kind of like lean into things that are like really nourishing for my soul rather than the alcohol or the TV binging, whatever my fun things are for the day. And when I can just kind of lean in and be present, I can start to witness those shifts. But it was like staying numb never even allowed me to identify any of it. Right. So I'm like really curious what this week will reveal.
This is where I think we've talked about it and said these words before, but like, this is where people talk about like being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like that's what this actually is. It's like, can I withstand this banter tennis match back and forth in my mind for God knows how long it's going to be. Right.
Yeah.
And allow it and just like, it's okay. Right. Yeah. I hear all of this. I hear you. It's okay. And it doesn't need to go away. I think that's also sometimes I think people misconstrue what meditation is for, or that our thoughts are going to at some point stop. It's never going to stop. But those, what is it? What are the ones where you had the old, is that called an 8-track? What is it when you had, where you put the
record.
The record. It's like the record
That's hysterical. The 8-track.
Okay. I don't remember. But you know, when the record just finally, it's just not as loud, right? Like it's just, it's still there. The record likes to, there's a couple of favorites in the, you know, jukebox, but it's not as loud as what it used to be.
I just had this thought pop up when Brenda, when you were saying like, we go through these cycles, we go through these gates or keys, right? And they're the same. The gates and the keys are the same, a little bit different languaging and how human design speaks to it versus how Gene Keys speaks to it. But it's the cycle that's always happening, and it's highlighted for us when we're in it. And if we have it defined or undefined, right? I thought of nature. You guys know me. I always like to take it back to nature, the cosmos. Like, where do we see this represented in nature for us? And for us, we always have seasons and cycles, and they'll look different depending on where in the world you are. So, like this being an individual perspective, of course, it always comes down to the individual. Like how we're perceiving and receiving life is, we think it's outside of us. We think it's more than what it is, but it's really how we're reacting and or responding within us. So these cycles are always going on. And, you know, like if you're Erin in California in spring, and it's 66 degrees and you're cold, but you're expecting warm because you typically live in Maui where it's warmer, that's going to cause a certain amount of frustration. And if we're not able to be aware, oh, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm feeling, then there might be sort of this desire to buffer or change or say this isn't right. And that's kind of where the addiction comes in, or the pattern of returning. Like I'm expecting it to be this way and it's not meeting my expectations. So having to change that internal environment, being either uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, or just recognizing, oh, this is just a mismatch in what I'm expecting to be experiencing versus what I'm actually experiencing. And each time I come back to that awareness, I have a chance to potentially do those subtle shifts like you were talking about, Kristie. Like, oh, if I'm aware, I can actually see that there's a little shifting going on here. And I can either like recognize the spiral and be okay that I'm in it, or I'm going to fight against it. And then, you know, we have those adaptive behaviors come in where we try to not feel what we're feeling.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of listening to a podcast right now with Byron Katie and Oprah on her Super Soul podcast. And you all know how often the word surrender comes up in my learning, and how my heels just dig in like a dog. I see my dog when I try to lift him into the car and he's like, I'm not going.
Or toddlers.
Like, right. You could apply that behavior to all of them, right? When they stiff as a board, when you try to put them in a car seat, God bless. But that same idea was coming up today. And she was even referencing that she does not have any suffering or sadness anymore. Like even at the loss of her mother from like pancreatic cancer, like, you know, like a really severe, and I know Tanya, you could like completely relate to this, but it really just made me think about that. The buffering, on the other side of the buffering is surrender, right? Like when I can practice and really lean into surrender, there's nothing to buffer, right? Because it's just accepting what is, and not needing to control it, and not needing to get out of pain, because there isn't pain, right? So
Yep.
wild.
Yep.
It is a very big unlearning or new learning or reconditioning, whatever the vocabulary is there, because just my upbringing, right?
You guys know how I like to play with words, like forgiveness is for giving. It's for giving to ourselves. Like the gift is actually to ourselves. And this makes me think about the word wound, because wound is also the same as wound. And when we are wound up a certain way, like we've spun our lives up, not only with our own story, but we have brought our parents and their parents and their parents' story in with all of that. There's this, I have a visual of it because I'm very visual about things, but it's like we've been wound up a certain way for so long. There's this anti-spiraling or an unwinding of that wound that we've been wound up with that needs to occur. It's that coming, bringing it, always bringing it back to us as individuals. How is this my story? Yes, I may have gotten it from my parents or my parents' parents, but how is this my story, and how does it keep showing up? And each time we work through one of those, rather than perhaps like falling into a buffering or an addiction, right? An adaptive behavior, but we have to be able to recognize that. Each time we're unwinding part of that so that we can then start winding things up the way we want them to be.
I heard something. What is Larry's last name? Larry from, I can't remember his last name.
Of like Morrison.
Thank you. I had noticed an awareness of my own. I'm really hesitant to call them addictions. I'll be like, they are, right? They're just addictive behaviors.
Ways of adapting.
Thank you. I know. I feel like I just need to like neutralize that word in my life.
That's the other thing, like trigger words, right? Like for some people, like if I tell my mom that like they don't necessarily have an addiction, it's just like, I mean, or their alcoholism is like, from like, that is huge for her. Like, no, they are
major
addicted.
defense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Adaptation. It's the way you've adapted.
Yes. Yeah. I noticed an awareness of my own adaptive behaviors, and I had this huge shame cloud over me. And it was just like encompassing to the point where I'm like, I just need to stop everything. And listening to him, he's really open about his journey. And he had said, I think he said, just love it for what it is. Like, love it for what it has given you, and try not to shame yourself for having it, and lean into it as long as you need to until you can find a better way. And it just was so graceful, like it didn't feel like there was any judgment, which of course, again, like I feel like he's seen really significant challenges in his life. I don't feel like that's been my story. But I'm also like, I don't know that I want to allow it to get there. Right. But I just feel like shame encompasses me when I talk about that word. So it is, it's like just relearning.
Even so, Brene Brown talks about the fact that shame cannot survive in the face of compassion, right? And just realizing that, like, we're all a work in progress. We all have adaptive behaviors. We've all done what we needed to do to survive, to adapt to the cards that we've been dealt. And I wanted to just focus, like looking at the four of us, like right now I'm looking at the four of us in a square. I don't know how this is going to end up appearing on the internet, but right now I'm looking at the four of us in a square. And one of the things that we tend to do either to ourselves or to other people is something I would like to bring to awareness, is like you said, he's had some real challenges that I haven't had.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of that.
I have taken the there's a test called the ACE test, which just takes into account childhood experiences where like a parent's been in jail, or they've been beaten, or they've, like they've had various experiences and scored high on the ACE test, whereas maybe some of you wouldn't even register.
Yeah.
Brenda's had her own experiences, with parents and with religion and that sort of thing. And we have a tendency to want to say, my life hasn't been that bad. I'm not allowed, or I'm minimizing the shame that I should have or can talk about. But we're all the same. We all have those feelings, whether we can, like, I want to end justifying.
I know.
We feel what we feel. We're human beings. We're designed to have feelings.
It's judgment, right? It's judgment. Like you, Kristie, are talking about judgment as in like, I judge myself.
My own self. Yeah.
But we also are like judging who's like, our life isn't as bad as someone else, which basically what we're saying is it's not okay to feel how we feel.
Yeah. And I think the word justification is so big. Like, yeah, they're all, I'm like, what is a world without justification? Like, I don't know that it exists. I don't know.
I want to go back to what you said about Byron Katie. And there's a Buddhist that says the same thing. It's like, and I think this goes back to like, we still feel when Tanya's mom died, she was crying, she was sad, right? But she wasn't resisting what she was feeling, right? And that's what the Buddhist, I don't know if it's I don't want to say poem, but like but there's those two arrows, right? And the first arrow is what we feel. And that's just our feelings, our experience of whatever. And then the second arrow is all of the judgment that we have. And that's where suffering comes from. It's like, if we just allow ourselves to feel whatever it is we're feeling versus putting on top and piling all of how we shouldn't be feeling this way, it extends that time. And how quickly can you, when you shared with us privately, one of the things that you had gone through, and you said how quickly you moved through it when you just allowed it, right? But how much of our feeling is actual just resistance of feeling?
100%. I think about so many of the parents that I get to work with right now, and the automatic responses of like, don't get frustrated, don't get so mad, right? Like it's not intending to be minimizing. It's in the most loving, nurturing way. It's just habitual
conditioning.
Yeah. And they don't even know that they're doing it. And when I bring it to their attention, they're like, but that's not what I meant. And I'm like, I understand it, but it still exists. And it's like this idea of really learning how to process an emotion is completely foreign. I mean, to me, it's tip of the iceberg, right? Like I know, and then learning how to experience this myself. But I just think our society as a whole collectively doesn't know anything about processing emotion.
Well, when we've all been raised to say, or I'm not going to say raised to say, that's not the right word, but the behaviors that were reflected to you as a child, your feelings don't matter. And that's what we've grown into as adults, is our feelings don't matter. Therefore, we can't have them, the really deep ones, the ones that, you know, and if we do try having those feelings, you know, or think about having those feelings or letting them peak up and out, there's a lot of shame to that. Oh, we're not supposed to feel, we're not supposed to, you know, because that's where we've been entrenched for so long. And some of them can be, I'm going to say, like a low layer of clouds that hangs over our heads for a while. And then the sun peeks through and burns the clouds off, like a marine layer, you know, and it's like, oh, this isn't that bad. I can work with this. And then the feelings can start to get stronger and stronger and stronger, you know, and as you're capable of handling more. And I think some of the adaptive behaviors or coping mechanisms or addictions, however language you want to put to those things, are us escaping the reality because we don't know how to process what we're being faced with, because we want the reality is bringing up these emotions that we don't know how to handle and how to process. And so we're trying to squash it back down because that's what we're supposed to do, or what we've been taught we're supposed to do. And it's incredibly difficult to even start to think that you can let those up and out. And, you know, one of the things I struggle with is I know I have a lot of anger, a lot of deep-seated anger on a multitude of topics. I don't yet know how to let that out in a way that's not harmful to everybody around me, because I'm afraid, I'm literally afraid if I let my true feelings out, it will be like, you know, a nuclear explosion to those around me who will have no idea what's going on. And I'm scared to death of damaging relationships and other things. Just, I'm still searching for a safe way to let some of those emotions out. Some of them are positive emotions, some of them are negative emotions, but they're all just as scary. You know, if I get too happy, what's going to happen? You know, it's like there's going to be a shoe that's falling. If I get angry and I explode, people might leave, abandon me because they don't know how to deal with this. Isn't what they signed up for. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that I, you know, that just monkey around in my head that say it's not safe. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is to let people know that you're not alone in how you feel, for sure. And everybody, I don't care who you are, everybody has come up with adaptive behaviors. One of mine, because I haven't shared that part yet, that I think is proving my value. Because I didn't matter what I wanted or what I felt or whatever, it didn't matter. So my value to you was based on other things I did. And that was my adaptation, was to prove, because if I couldn't feel, I could do, you know, and I could make you proud of me and make you love me and make you care about me by those things.
Like earning your spot.
Just earning my spot, because how I felt about things didn't matter. So it was a different way of adapting to life. And I'm still working on that. We're all works in progress, right?
And I think also our parents and grandparents, they don't know how to do it. Like, right. Like we say like how, but it's like, they don't know how to do it. It was interesting. This little boy on the plane ride home, the mom, she had on like a backpack or whatever, and the little baby was in the back. And then like 5 or 6 year old was behind her, and then the dad. And whatever the mom did, she kind of moved, and it kind of pushed the little boy, and he hit his head onto the little, when you first enter the plane, and he started to cry. And the dad didn't know. And he was like, it's okay. And I was like, no, he actually hit his head. He's like, oh, buddy, you know. And so the dad was doing like, oh, it's okay. You know, I know it hurts, and just comforting him and letting him cry. And the flight attendant, just like Kristie said with the parents, was trying to be helpful. She was like, are you going to go to the beach? Are you going to go to the beach? And I was like, I didn't say this, but if we just sit and let the little buddy cry, and like, it hurts, it really hurts, then it just dissipates, right? Yeah, it goes away. So, you know, we just don't know. So like Brenda said, like at Who You, like helping people, like it's a safe space of allowing people to, because some of those emotions feel really scary, right?
And I remember Kelsey's talking about like emotional evolution, or not eruption of these emotions, you can't like plan it, right? You're like, all right, Friday at noon, I got some time, I'm just going to sit and like let all my anger boil up. He's like, no, it doesn't happen like that. It just comes out of nowhere, hits you like, you know, like a Mack truck, T-boned you in the side of the car. And I feel that so deep. Like it always seems to be at the most inopportune time. I mean, how many times have I Marco Polo'd you all before I'm going out to eat in a dead cry, trying to put on mascara? Like, what's the point here, Kristie? But it's like those emotions just like always suffer. And I know like in reflection, some of that is like, I can start to see the triggers, you know, like when it happens in the same time, like, oh, maybe something's happening inside of me here. But it just, yeah, you can't plan to just sit. And like Brenda, I have a vision in my head, and I've never done this before, but we have things in Louisville called a rage room, where you just go in and you like have all your protective wear and you just break shit.
That would be fun.
I know. I'm a big thrower. I like to yell and throw. I'm like,
I wanted rage retreats, but Tanya's like,
how many hours can I get in this rage room? And I really am curious, if I go in, if I could like channel it enough that it could be therapeutic.
yeah.
Or would it just feel goofy at the first?
I know.
And would it evolve into something helpful?
And I think people are so afraid, like I'll be 42. If I have 42 years of anger, is it going to take me 42 years to get rid of it? Right. That's also something, but it's not, right. It's not at all.
You've got more than 42 years of anger, because you've got your parents'
generational.
Anger.
Yeah. But you get what I'm saying? Like people, they say their age and they're like, is that how long it's going to take me to get rid of this? And also I think what you were alluding to, Kristie, what is so important to say is like teaching ourselves there's nothing more important than how we feel. I know I have a dinner date, nothing more important. I'm stopping for me right now. Like I need to feel this. And I think like Brenda already said, right? Like it's not okay to feel how you feel. Shut it up. Put a lid on it. We got stuff to do. It's like, what's more important than what we're feeling?
Yeah. Glennon Doyle mentions this. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago too. In like her book, Untamed, she uses the word sobriety, and her definition of sobriety is not abandoning herself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what a beautiful definition, right? Because I don't think all people can relate to an addiction of, like, I think hers, she admitted, was food. I don't remember if like alcohol or drugs was in her story, but you know, like some people, like I might even undersell my addiction because it's not heroin, or you know, like something that
you judge your addictions
in like a health, right? Like it's not going to literally send me into an overdose or something if I'm people pleasing.
That runs parallel with I didn't have it that bad, I shouldn't feel this way.
Yeah.
But even the comment of it's not going to send me into an overdose. No, but what if it sends you into disease? What if it sends you, it's like, we have no idea.
It's a silent killer.
Yeah.
Right. It's a silent killer. That's the judgment that I feel like I have always kind of compared myself against, and like, well, it could be worse. And it's like, but it's not really looking at the illness that it's creating in my own body. Right. That the abandonment of self. And it doesn't have to be like a food or an alcohol. It could just be me saying yes to people that I really want to say no to.
I also, since we're getting close to the end of this one of the things that I want to say, especially with an experience that I very recently had, is that we're all the same, in that we all have these feelings that we've had to adapt. And there's a process that just naturally unfolds, just like nature, you know, has her seasons, she has her cycles. And there's always a pattern and a rhythm to things. It's like once we start coming to awareness that we've got these feelings within us, we're not going to be stuck never being able to work through and expressing them. And the fear is very real. Like Brenda, you were saying, like, I'm afraid to let this anger out. And I'm also afraid to let the joy out. And you've been asking, like we're all asking to grow and expand, because that's living. If we're not growing and expanding, we're dying, right? So there's always that movement outward to expand, to grow, to change. And it's not about necessarily getting rid of the emotion. It's about being able to move through it. And there's a certain, there's a cycle in the unwinding that we just have to know and trust. And it's hard. It's definitely hard, that we'll get there, that we'll be able to do it. We can't plan for it, just like Kristie was saying. We can't schedule it. It just happens when it does. And it's possible to get to a point, like the experience that I had several days ago was one where my husband and I were on a road trip, and he was angry about something, and he was expressing his anger, and it triggered a very deep, I just called it like the blackness that came up for me, and the rage that erupted out of me. It was almost a surreal experience, because in the past, I too have been afraid to let that anger out. Like, people are going to leave me. They're going to be like, oh, you're a no for me. Like, I'm going to push you away. And connection has been my Achilles heel. Like, love me, need me, want me. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. So as this anger erupted out of me, it was an interesting experience, because I was in this place of witnessing what was happening, almost as if I was like a bystander watching this occur. And I was very much in the rage, and I just had to say what it was that was coming up. Well, simultaneously, I was trying to comfort my husband and saying, this rage that's coming up is not about you. Like, this isn't you. This is me with me, because it's always us with us, and what we're allowing, what we feel like we're capable of working through. So I just want people to know that it is possible to grow, to be able to express more of that joy and more of that anger. And it's going to feel supremely uncomfortable. It's going to be a challenge. And, you know, we're going to have those cycles of starting and stopping. And then I call it like the postmortems. Sometimes when they happen, we're so deeply entrenched in it, we don't see the witness. We don't see the nurturer is not there. But then afterwards, we're able to debrief. And then each time that cycle gets a little bit smaller, to where I was like simultaneously in the debrief, the expression, and the witnessing and awareness of what was happening. It is possible. So I just want people to know that, like, and it doesn't matter how hard or easy you think your life has been, we all have it. We all have it present. And it's work. It's possible. It's possible to work through those things.
I think also it's possible, and it's also, dare I say, enjoyable when you have people that can hold space for you and not try to, I don't know what the word is. Brene Brown did such a great job in her Atlas of the Heart on the series on HBO. And she went through all of the different ways that we as humans help the person that's complaining to us, or like, you know, divulging any of their pain, and like we want to like take it away and help we just want to take it away from them. And how just sitting and being, right? It's a really hard skill, especially for a fixer, like to receive someone's pain and not to try to like come up with a solution, but
or a rebuttal.
Yeah, like an explanation, right?
Like a need to defend.
Yeah. So just thinking to encouraging people to find their way of supporting themselves, whether it's a strategy, whether it's a group, whether, like whatever it is that feels best to them. Sometimes it's good to have other people around to kind of lean into that.
Yep. Growing your safe space.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any final words? Are we good?
I do want to say real quick, I think what Brenda was talking about, like, can I feel this much joy, is like, or so much anger. It's like when we live right here, right? When we minimize our anger, we minimize our joy. And I know Tanya said expanding, but like really feeling the opposite of feeling so much joy is sadness or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It's like being good at feeling both of those, all of them, right? But like, we don't get so much joy in just a little bit of sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
So. Yeah.
And another possible way of, instead of seeing surrender is like, I think a lot of times people think about surrender as giving it away or getting rid of something. Like, I'm just gonna, like, how do I let this go? But it's stuck to me. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I just surrender this? It's really more about taking it in and embracing it and accepting it and understanding it. Like, of course I've had this addiction or I've had this adaptation, because it's what's kept me alive up to this point. And the minute we have compassion, love, and acceptance, and actually take that back into us, of course you would be angry right now instead of you shouldn't be angry. Mm-hmm. Of course you should feel this way, and allowing ourselves to feel those feelings. It's going to suck ass for a few minutes, and sometimes maybe even a few days, right? But when we
weeks.
Or like,
there's been some weeks or months, I think when you're first getting started, I think that's really like, when you first get started, you're like, how long is this gonna, I know that's resistance, but you're like, it's not a couple of days. It's not, at least for me, it wasn't, it was, for me, the shame just hung around like those cartoon clouds, it's just like, when is this going to end?
Yes.
Like one of those stinky farts that just is like hovers, like, ooh, it's in my nostrils now. I can't get rid of it.
I feel like I just experienced that with my puppies. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely, ladies.
As always. Until
so
next
good.
time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.